Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. And I hope everyone is enjoying the time in Ignite and in Barcelona. So today, we're going to talk about Palo Alto Networks integration with Nutanix. We're going to show you very cool demos. And I have with me Gregor from Nutanix, a solution architect. He will co-present the session with me. And however, before jumping into the presentation, I just want to do a quick show of hands. How many of you are using Nutanix today in your data center? Okay, that's a good percentage. And how many is using Nutanix Flow to segmenting inside the segmentation? Or testing, not maybe. What about VMseries? Are you using Palo Alto Network VMseries with Nutanix? Okay, that's a good few couple, just to get a feel of the room to how to steer the session. So before, I have to show the disclaimer. We may show some features that is still in beta, so the dates may slip a bit. However, just keep that in mind when you are taking any purchasing decision. So if anyone asks me what I need anyone from this room to take out from this session, is mainly three key points. Is why I need Palo Alto Networks and Nutanix in my data center, in my infrastructure, or in my environment. And what are the capability of these two solutions? How Palo Alto Networks and Nutanix, what are the capability of this solution? And the third piece and most important piece, how Palo Alto Networks and Nutanix can simplify the integration. It's not just about we have a very cool solution that can help us, but what are the main benefits? How we, as both companies, can help you guys with seamless integration inside your data center. However, I need to stop for a minute and take a step back and talk about the transformations that we are seeing today in the data center. So most of you noticed or knowing that there's a lot of transformation going on in the data centers. The data is everywhere. Your data is not in isolated data center anymore. Your data in the cloud, your data in your private cloud, your data is even in the IoT device in remote location. So data is everywhere. So there's a lot of transformation around the data center because of that. And part of it is the adoption of new technology. For example, we can see a lot of adoption for SDN solutions. And Nutanix, we're going to see today how Nutanix Flow provide a very robust and can help you with their SDN solution. The second piece to that, or driving the transformation, is also the application itself. Developing the application itself is not the same. We can see there's adoption for containers. So there's new processes like CI/CD in the market. So there's a lot of change happening in the data center in general. And this transformation is good, and most of us is trying to transform or in the journey of transforming. However, if we think about the current approach, how we can adopt security for this transformation, we can see that a lot of companies that's adopting silo solutions. They have many pointed solutions with a single purpose to secure different applications. Application A was secured with different security solutions and application B. So we end up with very fragmented environment, and that's it will affect the security posture in the environment. And if we think about the problem, what are the challenges? If we think about the problem and what are the challenges with the current approach, if we trying to adopt this current approach, is the transfer data center. There's many challenges, and it can be boiled down to four challenges or four problems. Mainly is the manual intervention, manual operation. With traditional data center, you can have your change process that can wait for a while. But as I mentioned, we have adoption for new technologies like container. Container can be spun up in a few seconds. So security need to be adapt fast. Security need to be automated as well. Your security actions doesn't need to wait for more than that few seconds as well. The second piece of that is the inconsistency. If you are still adopting multiple silos solution in the environment, you will end up with fragmented, heterogeneous environment. Different solution, application A is not secured a similar way as other application. And all of this will end up with more cost. So believe it or not, you will need to train your team with different solution. You have different management operation guidelines. You have different licenses. So you will end up with operation cost as well as complexity in the environment. And at the end of the day, we need to serve our users. So all these problems will result in a poor user experience. We all work in a company or worked in a company in the past where application A need to be connected. You need to be connected to the VPN to work with that application. However, application B break if you are connected to the internet. So you need to disable the VPN. So, so for that case, a user will end up with very poor experience. That's why we in Palo Alto Network, what we do recommend is to have a consistent security across your environment. And that's what our approach is. Secure any host, any network, and any cloud. And by any host, what I mean is it can be a bare metal server where you can use our segmentation next generation firewall, the hardware appliance to segment your environment, or you can use our virtual machine, VMSeries, which is a virtualized copy of the next generation firewall. You can use it to secure any of your hypervisor, for example, like the Nutanix Acropolis hypervisor. The second piece is also we need to push the security down to the fabric. We don't need only security adoption to be a traditional. That's why we work with vendors like Nutanix to integrate with their fabric solution like Nutanix Flow to push the security even down in the stack. So, however, as we're here today to talk about Nutanix, how our integration works with Nutanix, I just want to take few moments to talk about the key highlights about our integration with Nutanix today. So with Nutanix today, mainly on the basic use case is securing your workload, securing the traffic going on between your workload. And to do that, we have our VMSeries, which, as I mentioned, is the virtualized copy of the next generation firewall. You can deploy that on top of your Acropolis hypervisor to secure your workload for different use cases. For example, secure your hyper-converged infrastructure, secure your branch or remote office use cases. On the other piece, so securing your workload is a good thing. So this is the first step. However, as we mentioned, we need to have agile network. So we need to think about automation, how to make that deployment seamlessly. And that's where Nutanix did a very good job by creating a Calm blueprint, where Gregor, we're going to talk about it in further detail, about how to seamlessly deploy the VMSeries and Panorama in your Nutanix infrastructure with a simple clicks. The last piece of our integration is we also not thinking about just the deployment. The deployment is the first phase. But your security also need to track the workload. As the workload move, as the workload change, security need to adapt quickly. That's where we have a Panorama plugin where it can retrieve all the categories and tagging information from Prism Central and can be consumed in the security policy. We're going to zoom in each one of those in more detail. However, this is just a quick highlight about what our solution today, what we can do. And now I want to give it to Gregor, where he can take you guys in more detail about Nutanix product.
Thanks, Mo. Hi, everybody. My name is Gregor Davidson. I am a solutions architect with Nutanix, responsible for networking and security. What I want to talk to you about today, to start off with, is actually Flow. And carrying on from what Mo was saying is, Flow is the Nutanix micro-segmentation tooling. And we've come up with this idea and deployed this, and we're in quite a unique position, I think, because if you, again, take a step back, how you look at things, how they're done from a traditional approach, everything was a perimeter-based security. It was network-based, so you're focusing on subnetting, VLANing, CIDR ranges, and of course that's a completely different language to what potentially application developers talk, and a kind of lack of visibility. So, how can you secure something you don't know about? So, first of all, the visibility is very critical in terms of building up a airtight policy that you want to deploy. But from the perimeter side of things, you know, that perimeter is disappearing now. We're no longer securing just one big old data center. We have third-party software support engineers trying to come in. We have BYOD. We have extra VPN connections. So there's a lot of threats, and that attack surface is getting quite big. So this is where we came up with the idea to deploy micro-segmentation. Now, what we do here for Flow is deploy a stateful distributed firewall which enforces security policies at the VMNIC level. So it is managed and deployed through Prism Central, which is our centralized management interface, and pushed out to all the clusters. So it enforces that ubiquitous enforcement. It moves away from that network speak, which I was talking about. So moving away from caring about IP addressing, what subnet you're on, what VLAN you're on. We don't care about that anymore. We're moving toward this application-centric approach. So what applications are important to you? So if it's specific applications, specific environments, you can tag those environments and those applications how you want to, and then you can build a robust, simple security policy around those. And I've already touched on the visualization aspect. I mentioned before, there are several tools out there that try to do this, but native built into Nutanix, we have that visualization aspect where you can deploy a monitoring mode and find out exactly what level of traffic flows are occurring in your environment, some of which you might not want to happen. So I'll just mention briefly what is Flow. It is a distributed stateful firewall that runs across every single node in the Nutanix cluster. It also runs kind of on the Nutanix Acropolis hypervisor. It's secure in the east-west, this east-west traffic that we're hearing so much about now. I think about 75% of all data center traffic originates from within the data center. So and it's a complex thing to try and secure. It's not quite as simple as just securing via north-south firewall, your perimeter firewall. It gets a lot more granular requirements than needed. Central policy management, again, simplicity. Everything Nutanix does is around simplicity. So trying to give you that centralized policy management. The ubiquitous enforcement I've touched on. The application-centric security policy, again. It's very important to have that flexibility, I think, where you don't just have to try and secure a /24 subnet or a bunch of devices. Being able to build up a policy that's specific to your business needs around your applications is more important, and the visualization. There are 4 primary use cases to Flow, and I'm going to dive on these in a little bit more detail. The first one is kind of application ring fencing, so trying to secure your inbound and outbound traffic from a specific application or between applications. VDI security. The chances are normally you would have a load of VDI desktops on a single subnet, which is a layer 2 broadcast domain, which can just talk to each other. So does that need to happen? Probably not. So why don't you just isolate them all from each other? Environment isolation. So when you just don't want one environment to talk to the other. It could be production from test or UAT or particular data centers. You can completely isolate traffic from those two environments. And lastly, compliance. When you want to potentially deploy a PCI, non-PCI environment, so being able to help you deploy and adhere to any kind of compliance requirements is something which Flow can help with. So the isolation policy, I just touched on briefly there. And this kind of screen grab should show you the simplicity of what we're doing here. We've got 2 environments that have been created, or categorized as we call it, category dev and category production, and we just want to completely isolate these 2. So once these get put into an isolation policy, they're blacklisted and nothing can talk between those 2 environments. So you could have obviously 1,000 VMs tagged as production and 1,000 VMs tagged as dev, and they just can't talk to each other. So completely cutting it off at the knees. Now, secondly, and this is a very important one, I think, is the application ring fencing. So not just tagging specific applications, but also within that application. Traditionally, where you have, with the kind of birth of microservices and even virtualization, you no longer have one monolithic application. You've got a load of services that make up an application for you, or vice versa. So you could have a web tier, middleware, database. And again, traditionally, they're kind of open on that layer 2 server network. Does everything need to talk to each other? Probably not. So you can drill down within a single application to go into these tiers and then isolate it, as you show in here within this app type A. We have web app and DB tiers. So you can get very granular in terms of how we're going to secure that environment. And then the quarantine policy. Now, Mo's going to demo this shortly, but effectively, we have a default quarantine policy that if in an ideal situation, we're going to have some form of, Palo Alto that's going to detect a potential threat, a malware risk, and that's going to basically fire in an API call to Nutanix, and we can quarantine that VM. So it's, again, completely cut off at the knees. You need to then get to the console to remediate or allow any forensic remediation in. In this situation, you can see here we have the two scenarios, strict and forensic. If you have any kind of predetermined remediation tooling set up, you can allow that to have access, or otherwise everything's completely cut off. And you can see on the right-hand side here, that in red is effectively that quarantined VM that's trying to communicate out, but we're cutting it off. Now, as I touched on before, this distributed firewall that Flow uses operates layer 3 and layer 4, which is great. And it cuts off, I guess, about 70% of the kind of standard east-west traffic that's required. Now, there are instances where perhaps deep packet inspection is required, some kind of URL filtering, something which you need a bit more intelligence. So this is where we partner with Palo Alto, and in particular their Panorama and VMSeries Firewall. So what this allows us to do is deploy the VMSeries Firewall on top of Nutanix HV, and then we can then dynamically select what traffic we want to then get pushed through the Palo Alto firewall. In this instance, in this example, I'm pushing all my web traffic from web to DB through my Palo Alto firewall. And that allows us to do a lot more kind of deep packet inspection, like I mentioned, but a bit more higher intelligence. And this is quite simply done by our security change, our service change as we call it. Very simple again to do, simple drop-down box. You select your service chain, and then in this instance again, any TCP connections on 3306 are going to get routed through to Palo Alto firewall. Let's communicate from web to DB. And if you're unfamiliar, AHV uses OVS, Open vSwitch, for our networking, and this is how we kind of substantiate the service chaining. We basically allow to selectively manipulate that traffic, push it through that east-west firewall. And we have two modes there. We can do it inline, where we can take proactive action on it, and also put it in tap mode if we just want to do some form of monitoring or packet copying. And this is what's done in the OVS bridge. Oops. Just going to hand over to Mo again briefly.
So this is very cool. What Nutanix can do using their Nutanix Flow, it's very cool what they can do. But however, let's summarize what are the key benefits. What's the benefit you're going to get when you deploy Nutanix and Palo Alto networks in your environment? And I can summarize these key benefits to four parts, and we're going to zoom in each one of them, and we're going to see very cool demos that Gregor and myself going to show you in a couple of moments. So the first piece is the seamless provisioning. So as we mentioned earlier during the presentation, to match the transformation that's happening in the data center, we also need to have fast deployment. We need to have agile operation. That's where Nutanix builds a calm blueprint that can help deploying and expedite deploying the VMSeries and Panorama easily in the Nutanix environment. The second piece is no-brainer in my opinion, visibility, because if you don't see it, you cannot protect it. So the visibility, you will need the visibility that Nutanix provide, as well as the layer 7 visibility that Palo Alto networks provide to have visibility into your environment so you can have better security adoption. The third part is advanced segmentation. So traditional segmentation of having subnet for each application tier doesn't work anymore, or putting a perimeter firewall and call it a day, it doesn't work, because believe it or not, 75 of your traffic is east-west traffic. So you need to have even advanced segmentation inside your network. We're going to see how you can achieve that with Palo Alto Networks as well as with Nutanix. The last piece to that is automated security. And this is also connected to the other key benefit as well. Your security need to be fastly adapt to what's happening around. We need to take action as soon as there's new workload in the environment, as soon as there's infected workload, we need to take action quickly. So we're going to zoom in every one of these key benefits and show you some demo. However, here I want to stop and give it back to Gregor, where he's going to talk about the Calm blueprint and how they can deploy the VMSeries and Panorama seamlessly in the environment.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, so Nutanix has a product called Calm, which is around application lifecycle management. And what it effectively allows you to do is build an application once and then repeatedly deploy that. You can build in all your dependencies, build in all your packages, images, cloud init scripting to get everything up to scratch. And then from that point forward, you can then deploy that onto whatever cloud you would like to. But what Palo Alto and Nutanix have done is got together and built this blueprint. So it allows you to do a one-click deployment from Prism Central, which is where Calm resides. We can deploy a blueprint which will then push out and create your VMSeries firewalls, spin them up, and also deploy Panorama as well. So in this instance, Calm can deploy the firewall on all the HV nodes, deploy a Panorama VM. It will create the service chain. It will then go, apply all the licensing. It will then register the VMs to Panorama as well and get you up to speed in a matter of minutes as opposed to hours or days, and takes away that kind of human interaction which could potentially cause risk by trying to do the configuration. So this is something which I'm going to touch on briefly in some of my demos. We're not going to demo the whole blueprint because it's just watching VMs spin up really. But again, as I mentioned, this is where we can start to select traffic and redirect it through the specific Palo Alto firewalls. Rightio. So I'm going to show you a demo now using Nutanix Flow and Palo Alto VMSeries Firewall. We're going to use the instance of URL filtering. We're going to build a flow policy, use a service chain, and I'm also going to touch briefly on what the blueprint looks like. Rightio. So in this instance, we've got a couple of desktops built, a HR desktop and a sales desktop, and I've got two desktops open here, and we've got access to the Nutanix website and Facebook. And in this instance, the VMs currently can all talk to each other. So I'm pinging currently from one desktop to another. What I want to do is actually isolate all my VMs so they can't talk to each other from a VDI perspective. And also, I'm going to want to block Facebook so my employees will actually do some work. So we can see here, I'm just doing a couple of pings from desktop to desktop. But what we can see here now, I've got a couple of VMs. I've got a category created under the app type. We're going to update this and create a new app type called department. This could quite easily be VDI or desktop, whatever it may be. And then under the tiering, we're going to create a sales and a HR category. And so this is how we kind of assign relationships and tags to our VMs. Once that's done, we're going to go into our VMs and we're going to tag those VMs with the appropriate tagging. So the advantage here is we're going to assign both VMs under the same app type because they form a single service, like for example department, but then each one has part of a different tier. It's either HR or sales. So we can see we've just updated the HR, and we're going to do the same with the sales desktop. We're going to manage the quarantine. Very simple. Everything's driven through Prism Central here. This is my sales. So now these two are tagged. You'll see that the categories pop up. There we go. HR and department. Now we're going to build a security policy. And this is we're going to select the application policy. We could do isolate environment, but we want to use the inbound and outbound security rules here. Give it a simple name and a purpose. so you can keep track of what we're trying to secure, in this instance desktops, and I want to protect my app type that's equal to department. Now this is where we get really, really good, because we can start to add tiers that's responsible or part of that app type into this bit. And by default, it's a blacklist only, so we're going to start to whitelist, whitelist only, so we're going to whitelist, in this instance, all my desktop subnets. And then we're going to allow that into my HR and sales desktops on TCP 3389. Other ports and protocols are available. And we're going to do the same for each tier. Now, we're going to set rules inside that application. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to completely isolate all my HR department desktops and my sales desktops from talking to each other. They don't need to talk to each other. The VDI desktops, and by default, HR cannot talk to sales. Simple isolation. And now, again, we're going to whitelist only for outbound traffic, and we're going to put this out to an any address in this instance, and also create a DNS entry. But you can see here, we can start to isolate between subnets, which are potentially outside your control, standard IP addressing and subnetting, or you can do it on categories. So this is where you can start to isolate on a category-based scenario inside your data center. This is right here where we're going to redirect this traffic on port 80 or 443 through that service chain, Palo Alto network functions, and we're going to do the same for this tier. So now, anything coming from the VDI environment coming out of that app type on 80 or 443 is going to get routed through to that Palo Alto firewall. The Flow distributed firewall will take care of that communication, blocking communication between desktops itself. And we're going to show you here now. This is a blueprint. This is how it looks like. You can see here we're going to deploy in this instance 4 firewalls. That's the service chain, pan_NF. And this is where you can start to add in services. Calm is a big beast in itself, and it's very flexible, but it's not a topic we're going to discuss in too much detail today. So at this point, we're going to jump into Palo Alto. We have a rule that says deny the book, which is blocking Facebook and a URL filtering. And now we're going to go back to our desktops, and we'll see we should still have access to our nutanix.com. However, Facebook, that connection should be reset, and we cannot get to Facebook anymore. Ideally, that would splash up a splash page saying Palo Alto's blocking you because you're not allowed to do it. And in this instance, again, now all our pings are blocked off. So this is the Flow distributed stateful firewalls blocking this, and the Palo Alto is doing URL filtering on the Facebook and blocking that. And what we can see in a minute, we'll hop back into the Palo Alto, and you can see, well, you're just reiterating the fact that pings between desktops aren't working. That's connectivity. And now the hit count has gone from 40, should jump up and show you that we're hitting that. So that's our first demo around utilizing, deploying VMseries and routing traffic, selected traffic to that to do that URL inspection.
How cool is that? It's a matter of, now we can inspect the packet as soon as the packet gets born. When the VM sends a packet out, Nutanix Flow will intercept that and send it to Palo Alto. So you get micro-segmentation from Nutanix plus what Palo Alto provides from thread and application detection. So this is the first piece, the seamless provisioning. That's what Gregor mentioned in detail. The second part to the integration benefit is the visibility. And as I mentioned, if you don't see it, you cannot protect it. You cannot inspect it. And that's where Palo Alto or PAN-OS play. With PAN-OS, you can rip off the packet and see what's going on inside. Not everything running in port 80 means web browsing. So an attacker can use traditional security policy to send malicious traffic on a loud port. So what Palo Alto Network can do, we have our application detection engine where it can really detect the actual application running So you have the visibility on your east-west traffic. All the traffic that Nutanix Flow will send to Palo Alto Networks, we can rip it off and see what's going on inside. Not only detecting the application, we can also look at the threat. So we can, if there's any malicious activity, any virus activity, we can look into that. We have also our Wildfire Cloud, where we can send the information to the Wildfire Cloud for sandboxing. If there's some malicious file or malicious event that no one in the universe seen before, a zero-day attack, we can also have that visibility in a matter of 5 minutes. So this is really important. You need to have visibility. This is one of the key important piece you need to have in your data center. You need to have the visibility, and that's where the joint integration will provide. The second part is the advanced segmentation. So as I mentioned, is traditionally our segmentation is based on tier. We say web app DB, everyone sit in a separate VLAN and call it a day. However, that doesn't work. We need to really look down and see what's going out on this east-west traffic. So we need to start. So starting with application segmentation, this is the first step. Put every application in its own tier. That's the first step. However, besides that, we need to go down to the workload protocol-based segmentation, where the VM, every VM need to be its own segment, and that's where Nutanix Flow add to the picture. Nutanix can really look in every single port in your environment. You are now down to the port of every workload in your environment. The last piece to that, you need to have application-based segmentation. You need only to segment using your application ID, not only by port. You need to also go down up in the stack to define more advanced segmentation. And actually what PanOS provide, we can have more comprehensive policies. You can define for segmentation. Tomorrow, on Friday morning, there's a session about micro-segmentation practices in Palo Alto Network. So I really recommend everyone to attend that session. They're going to talk about segmentation in deep detail about how you can achieve segmentation with PanOS. So this is the third piece of the puzzle. What you can benefit from Palo Alto Networks and Nutanix integration. However, as we mentioned early on the session, you need to also adapt to what's going on in the environment, and you need to have automated security actions in your environment. That's where our plugin, so Nutanix, as Gregor mentioned, you can assign tags. So as soon as workload got spun up in your environment, you can assign tag based on the app type, or you can give custom tags. So you can have metadata now tagging in your environment. So, and how we can benefit that in terms of security, we can decouple ourselves from using the traditional way of putting source and destination subnet in your security policy. So because that will widen your attack surface, you need to really secure what's running on the environment, what is legitimately running on the environment. Not any malicious workload getting correct IP in the subnet can access your environment. That's where Panorama has a plugin that we can go and talk with Prism Central via API. We retrieve all this metadata, and it can be consumed in the security policy for even automated security as well as with segmentation. So if I want to talk about what is this dynamic object is, actually it's feature in PanOS, we call it dynamic address group. So this is how we consume these tags, or how we consume this metadata is via feature. We call it a dynamic address group. And the easy way to think about the dynamic address group, it's an empty bucket. This is an empty object that you populate dynamically as there's a workload change in your environment. So for example, you have today one web server. You give it a tag as a web. And we immediately will learn the IP of that web server, web VM. If there's a new VM that added in your environment, you just assign the tag, and this object that you're using in your source or destination will be updated automatically with the new IP. So it's an empty bucket that can be updated dynamically into your environment. And the good part of this is actually it's reducing your attack surface, because now you only in your security policy only legitimate VMs, only legitimate workload that has a correct tag can have access into the network, either east-west or north-south. So it's a nice feature that can help with segmentation and also is automation. It makes your life easier. You don't need to go and update your security policy manually every time there's a new workload in the environment. So the APIs will take care of that automatically as soon as it's going to spin up. And here we're going to show you a very quick demo about how this dynamic address group tagging work, how Panorama can pull it out from Nutanix. And Gregor have a very cool demo to show you guys about this. Maybe I can help with.
I'm back. So as Mo said, yes, now I'm going to show you briefly what exactly that Panorama plugin is doing with Prism Central. So here, the blueprint has already been deployed. I already have my VMSeries spun up, and Panorama is already deployed. I'm just going to briefly show you here the fact we have a WordPress application deployed, a category with 2 values, database and web. You can see here I've got 1 VM assigned to each of those values, VM ending in .98 and .99. So it's giving you that visibility through Prism. Now, what's going to happen when we go into Panorama? What happened when we deployed that blueprint is that blueprint obviously created the VMs, the VMSeries firewalls, created the device group. It's imported all the template stack and created that device group I mentioned with all the VMSeries kind of dynamically tagged into it. Now, if you're familiar with Panorama, this is where you go play with your plugins. You can see now we have the Nutanix Prism Central plugin. From within here, you just enter in your credentials for Prism Central and it hooks in via the APIs. Now here, we're just going to create a notify group and tag that into the Nutanix device group. Create a monitoring definition that's going to tie all that nicely together, tie it up in a pretty bow. And once that's done, what we're going to see is the fact now all those categories that you've created that's completely customizable for your own business needs, your own security structure, they're going to get sucked into Panorama. And here when we create an address group and a dynamic address group, this is now going to allow us to pull in those categories that have been already defined in Prism, in Nutanix. You can see here we're going to pull in the web tier and simultaneously or similarly we're going to create the database tier. Now the advantage of what we're doing here is, and again as Mo said, this is not just going to suck the category in but all the kind of VM information and the IP addressing. So this comes into play when you start to potentially need to do an IP change on that VM or do a live migration, vMotion that VM across from host, for example. That becomes irrelevant because we're dynamically pulling that address group and that information in, and we can start to use those categories and dynamic address groups to create security rules within Panorama. So here we're adding the web tier and database as a source and destination, which is being pulled from the categories you've created in Prism Central. And once that's done, we're quite simply going to apply that, and that will then get pushed out to that device group, which manages the VMSeries appliances on top of Nutanix, and away we go. So I'm going to hand over to Mo to finish up. This is just going to wrap up. Yeah. You can stop that one.
So how cool is that, right? It's very cool that we can track. You can think, for example, you have a web tier where there's a scale-out event need to happen. In a scale-out event, there's a new web server added. Then traditionally, you will take these IP addresses and go to your firewall and update the security policy manually. With the dynamic address group integration, all this happens dynamically. You don't even need to worry about it. All you need to do while you're publishing your workload in Nutanix, you need to just give it the correct tag, and we will take care of the rest. So this is very nice, the automation. However, we can even go further. We can even take action into surrounding environment to help to adapt security even further. And that's by doing what's interacting with Nutanix quarantine capability. As Gregor mentioned earlier, you can assign, you have in Nutanix Flow, you have a quarantine policy where you can assign workload to that policy, and automatically that work is completely isolated. So I'm going to show you a quick demo about how we can utilize this feature to automatically isolate malicious workload in our environment. So in this use case, I have multiple VMs running on top of Nutanix Flow, and one of that VMs will gonna initiate or download a malicious file. So think about VDI use case, a virtual desktop, a user log into his desktop or her desktop and download a malicious file. All this traffic, because the firewall is inline, PAN-OS will detect that malicious activity, and depend on your security configuration, you can block it or you can allow it. That's the first step. We can detect the malicious activity. We can take action. However, the action can go further. We can go and send an API call to Nutanix Prism Central in order to isolate that. So the workflow, if we think about it, is the first step is the workload will initiate a malicious activity. The workload is either download a file, send a file. So the workload will start a malicious activity. What's happened is PAN-OS, because VMSeries is inline, PAN-OS will do the detection step. PAN-OS will detect that there's a malicious activity and take action on that specific flow, either alert admin or, for example, block that malicious activity. That's the first step. However, what we can do next is the PAN-OS VMSeries can send and share the logs with Panorama, our management server. And in Panorama, the admin can create conditions, say, if I found any specific log event, like, for example, any thread event with critical severity, trigger an API call. That API call can be, for example, raise a ServiceNow ticket or send an email. So there's a lot of different action. However, in this specific case, or in this specific use case, Panorama, as soon as it detects the action, it will gonna send an API call to Prism Central. And the API call, or why we need that API call to tell Prism Central, you have a workload that we think it's malicious, please put that workload in a quarantine policy. And then using the API, Prism Central then will push that down to Flow, and that workload will be completely isolated. It cannot communicate to any outside node. So as you can see, in a matter of seconds, automatically the workload can be isolated. So this is very nice feature where you can have dynamic security action in your environment. And then the IT admin can then go and rectify it and remove the quarantine. So this is what I'm going to show you on the last demo for today. So yeah. So for this demo, we have a virtual desktop. We have a single Windows virtual desktop running on top of Nutanix Acropolis hypervisor, and we can see the IP is 140.32. And in this case, we can see that it has a category app, and there's one policy called app. So this traffic, any traffic going from this workload is redirected using Nutanix Flow, redirected to the VMSeries for inspection. So we can see that this now, if we log in, do a remote desktop to the virtual desktop, we have a normal access into the network. We can go to Google, for example, and have normal browsing. However, let's say this user is uneducated or not well aware about security. So he just went to any malicious website and download a random file. And this file is a virus, let's say, for example. So what's happened, because the PAN-OS device is in line, in a matter of seconds, PAN-OS detected that there's a malicious activity, and the action is alert. That's why we take action on that. And the next step, Panorama, the log is shared with Panorama and went and assigned a quarantine policy to that workload. That workload is now part of the quarantine default policy, which is strict. It cannot communicate to any outside. So this VM is completely, any packet going out of that VM, it's completely isolated by Nutanix Flow. So we push the policy down to the fabric. If we want to rectify that, let's say we think that is not malicious anymore, we can just unquarantine that VM, and we can see that immediately the user can log back to the virtual machine again. And as you can see, it's not only about detection and taking action in the firewall. We can also take action around in the surrounding environment. And it's very nice capability of PanOS. So with that, I really want to thank you, everyone, about your time. However, last thing I want to mention is the Panorama plugin that Gregor demoed you is today in beta. Anyone that's want to try it out can send email to VMSeriesBeta@Palo Alto Networks, and we can send the binary. If you have Panorama, you don't need any extra license. It's free of charge if you have Panorama. And we can send the documentation as well as binaries itself. And for sure, Nutanix guys will be more than happy to help if you have any question related to the categories or the integration with Nutanix Flow. And last but not least, myself and Gregor, we always like to improve personally and professionally. So if you can take some time and provide some feedbacks, it will be really appreciated. And I will open the rest of the time for Q&A. If anyone have a question for me or for Gregor, please go ahead.
Sure.
Nutanix, you have a way to work hybrid, so on private cloud and public cloud, is that correct?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, sorry?
So you developed Nutanix to work in a hybrid mode, so that you have a private cloud and a public cloud, and it's all white person, is that correct?
So we integrate with the cloud in a number of ways. We obviously deploy enterprise cloud on-prem, so we get all the functionality that you expect from the cloud by utilizing Nutanix on-prem. We have the capability to deploy things like Xi clusters, which is running Nutanix on AWS bare metal, for example, and that is seamlessly managed via Prism Central. We have our own public cloud called Xi. Primary use case is DR as a service, but that is kind of our data centers with our kit in, allowing you to do kind of DR as a service, but also kind of run workloads. And then the Calm product I mentioned allows you to build these blueprints and then deploy that to whatever public cloud you have authentication to log into. So there's a few things we touch on there in terms of how we can manage public cloud, as well as on-prem cloud. And then we have a functionality called Move, which allows you to move workloads between AWS, for example, and on-prem. So there's a couple of
Does that mean that what you explained today also works with those kind of scenarios, or is that only the on-prem which is working today?
So obviously this is deployed within the OVS level, within the OVS kernel. So it needs to be running AOS, running AHV. So it would work in some scenarios, but not if you're running your own public within Google or AWS, anything like that. It needs to be on HV. Yes?
How many Palo Alto firewalls you need to deploy in a cluster? I was seeing that you're deploying with Calm, 1 VM per playbook or whatever it was called. But is that just one Palo Alto VM for one node, or how does it work?
So depending on what you want to achieve, we would always deploy 1 VM per node. Now, you don't have to, but if obviously your VMs are liable to move between hosts, that traffic, because we intercept that at the VM NIC level, we redirect that to the local VMSeries Firewall. So
it's basically you recommend one Palo Alto VM for one node.
yeah.
So we support different models of VM-series. So we have from VM100 up to VM700. So any model. So each model has a different hardware resource requirement, the memory and CPU. But there's no specific model for support usage.
And obviously
One last thing I want to mention, within Nutanix technology, right, the cluster technology, you have affinity rules. So you can, if you choose to do so, set a certain number of servers, right, as basically protected by Palo Alto and for given application.
Yeah.
It's possible.
If you didn't want everything to go through your Palo Alto firewall, then you can, as Ashkar said, use pinning affinity rules, stick them on a small number of nodes and do that. But the thing to consider in that scenario, if you're thinking about kind of licensing or cost, because Flow can cut off 70% of that traffic at the VM NIC level, the amount of traffic you're only wanting your important traffic, if you like, to go through that firewall, which is a lot less. So that VMSeries Firewall could be a 100, 200, 300, and of course that's not even hitting your physical networking. So your perimeter firewall could now be reduced in size, and licensing could be changed. Any more questions? Yes.
Related to that, the NS6 integration, Panorama can spin up a VMSeries on a new host if one tagged VM pops up on that host. Do you have a similar behavior on Linux?
So in NSX Manager, as soon as there's new host added to the cluster, will spin up a new VM. So if there's a new Nutanix node added, will Nutanix add a VM series?
Spin up a VM series. It's a calm question. I think calm has a scale-out approach, so we can detect that, and it'll just do a scale-out and deploy a VM-series firewall, I believe. I'll double-check on that, though.
It's just about actually deploying a new VM for this new node, and you can definitely just gather a pre-arranged range to get all the IPs deployed automatically during the blueprint deployment.
In terms of PAN-OS configuration, so the deployment is one piece and getting the configuration is the second. So PAN-OS, as soon as that VM connect to Panorama, it's called home to Panorama. Panorama will push the configuration and it will be consistent policy.
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
I give you a few background before the question.
Sure.
Here I'm from exclusive networks, especially in Italy. We are trying to build almost the same environment that you show us with different use cases. I tried also yesterday, but the part about the CAN blueprint, where we can find it. Because we have some guide that says, okay, upload the CAN blueprint, set up the environment, and then you can move. But,
Sure.
I can email you the blueprint.
It would normally reside on the Nutanix marketplace. I think currently it's not there at the minute.
You can just download the blueprint, but it's supposed to be available on the marketplace in County. Just go in the marketplace and you got the Jenkins BB and also the lateral blueprint.
Easiest way, just ping one of us and we can email it to
Yeah,
you.
we'll
Just a
be
JSON.
more than happy. It's a JSON file.
Just a 25K JSON file. So it's, no.
Are you Adriano? You are Adriano? No, you're not. Your name is not Adriano.
No, Manuel.
Any more questions, guys? Sorry, Philip. No? Well, I appreciate your time, guys. If you want to come and talk to myself or Mo, or we've got a lot of Palo Alto and Nutanix sales people here as well, feel free to come and chat to us. We've also got booth duty in the hall as well. Feel free to stop by.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.